Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu orders occupation forces to launch a ground offensive against the Gaza Strip. Renewed Israeli strikes on Gaza kill another 6 Palestinian children, raising the death toll to 237. Warring sides in Ukraine trade blame after a Malaysian Airlines plane is shot down in the east of the country, killing 295 people. And Russia warns fresh U.S. sanctions against Moscow will backfire, describing the move as blackmail. Good evening, Mariam Khaddad with you this hour at Al World News. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered occupation forces to launch a ground offensive against the Gaza Strip. The announcement marks a major escalation in the conflict. So far, there have been limited incursions into the Strip, but the talk has now shifted to a full ground invasion. There are over 40,000 Israeli troops stationed along the Gaza border. Immediately after a temporary 5-hour ceasefire between the Israelis and Hamas expired, Palestinian resistance groups launched rockets at a number of Israeli settlements in response to fresh Israeli airstrikes against the Gaza Strip, which killed at least 7. Israeli warplanes struck Beit Lahia north of Gaza on Thursday afternoon, killing 1 person. Another 3 children were killed in an airstrike on the neighborhood of Sabra in central Gaza. At least 3 other children were killed in Khan Yunis, as the Israelis stepped up their brutal onslaught against the Strip. Israeli artillery fire, meanwhile, left large parts of eastern Gaza without power. Across the Gaza frontier, 2 Palestinian rockets landed in Ashkelon, while 2 others hit the settlement of Beersheba as well as Ashkel. Let's cross over to our Gaza correspondent, Bessem El Atrash, who is standing by to give us an update. Bessem, just moments ago, we were receiving reports that Netanyahu ordered a ground invasion on Gaza. Are Israeli troops currently entering Gaza?
Yes, Netanyahu had ordered a ground invasion on Gaza just about moments ago. Actually, before the statement was released, the beginning of the ground invasion had started about 1 hour ago when the Israeli artillery started shelling the areas of Shijaiya, eastern Gaza and northern Gaza. As you can see from the view behind me, and now I hear ambulances, which means that there has been casualties among Palestinians. Just about a while ago, the Israeli artillery shelled houses of Palestinians, destroying over than 25. Actually, there are people trapped under the rubble of these homes and calling for help from the Palestinian officials who can't even manage to get to these locations. The situation is critical and the offensive is getting more aggressive than before. The Israeli artillery is just not ground invading Gaza. Also, the Israeli warplanes are roaming the skies and hovering over all the Gaza Strip, dropping bombs everywhere and missiles. Also from the sea, the Israeli naval boats are hitting and shelling the northern area and also southern area.
Let me just cut you off for a second. Do we know how far the Israelis are willing to go with this incursion? How is it going to be a partial invasion or a full invasion?
Well, it seems so far that it's going to be aggressive ground invasion since around 8,000 Israeli soldiers are participating in this operation. I can just hear another strike or shelling in the eastern side of the Gaza Strip. You can tell from the smoke behind me right now. Here are the Palestinian rockets flying towards southern Israeli settlements. The smoke here, you can tell from the smoke that over entire neighborhoods are being destroyed. There are fires also in the homes of the residents. Actually, Benjamin Netanyahu had announced that this ground operation is for its main target is to destroy all tunnels that Hamas or resistance group use in firing rockets against the Israeli settlements. And he actually mentioned that even if that means hitting residential areas and homes of civilians, then they will hit them. It seems like the Israelis are taking it to a really higher level right now, or maybe just taking advantage that there might have been a ceasefire tomorrow or the day after that. So they are just going to take the best advantage they can from the situation right now.
Well, do we know, Bassem, which direction the Israelis are entering Gaza?
Currently, the information reported to us just about before I got live on air just moments ago that still the tanks and the artillery are on the borders. They still didn't enter any Palestinian territories yet, but they are planning on a ground invasion in order to reduce the tunnels or in order to eliminate all the tunnels that the resistance group use. So far, the tanks and artilleries are just shelling the borders. All the homes on the borders are being destroyed. Again, I repeat, there are Palestinian residents in the homes calling on for help in order for somebody to come and evacuate them. Some of them already died under the rubble. The medical teams can't even manage to get there.
And Bassem, we're just going to shift a little bit now. What more can you tell us about these 6 children who were killed today?
Yes, true. There was 2 massacres today. The first one was in Hayy Sabra in Gaza, where 3 Palestinian kids under 9 years old were killed by Israeli warplanes that targeted the roof of their home while they were playing. Also, another massacre occurred eastern Shijaiya when another Israeli warplane targeted a home, killing 3 other children from the same family. 6 children died today. 4 children died yesterday, a lot before that. It seems like the Israeli, here we have another rocket launched to the Israeli southern settlements. The resistance is fighting back furiously. They are doing their part in resisting the occupation in the past 4 hours more than...
Bassem, why are they attacking children? Why are they targeting these children? What are the Israelis hoping to achieve with such tactics?
It seems like the Israelis are just, they don't know what they're doing anymore. They're so furious from the amount of rockets being fired against them. It seems like they are just killing children. They are children killers anyway. In the war 2012 and 2008, they killed a large number of children. It seems like they don't care what they are doing. They just want to hit and hit and hit. It's not related to any kind of rocket launching sites or even military or resistance groups or even resistant members. All they are doing is just killing children, targeting civilians, and destroying homes.
Well, has any international humanitarian aid been able to reach the Gaza Strip?
Today, there was a 5-hour humanitarian truce. We hoped that humanitarian aid could enter through the crossings. Karim Abu Salim crossing did not open today. No humanitarian aid entered. Also here, the ICRC and other humanitarian aid organizations can't even manage to get to these locations. As you can see, the shelling is so aggressive that even ambulances, if they enter or come close to the area, as before and as we witnessed in previous wars, Israelis don't care. They shoot ambulances and they shoot medical teams. Whatever gets close to the locations that are getting hit, they shoot them. So the humanitarian aid here situation is deteriorating, and no humanitarian aid is being reached in those locations.
So Bassem, can you give us the mood of Gaza at this current time with now that we know that an escalation is, well, imminent at this point?
Yes, the ground invasion, actually the Palestinians expected it and not expected it at the same time. Israel had threatened with the ground invasion, but the Palestinians didn't expect for the Israeli entity to actually order a ground invasion. They are prepared, the resistance is prepared, but the Palestinian general people here are in fear of what the Israeli entity is hatred and anger this time might do. This war actually is more aggressive than war 2008, 2012. This war targeted more civilians, more homes destroyed. Actually, local Palestinians are naming this war the war of homes, since a large number of homes has been destroyed, and all they target is civilian homes and residential places. The situation here among the Palestinians is a little bit of fear, but the resistance group, as I said, are doing their best to protect the people. As you can see from the view behind me, the electricity has been cut off all Gaza City. It seems like the artillery, Israeli artillery, had hit the power generator or the power feeder for the whole area.
All right, we will leave it there. Bulletin Al-Atrash reporting from Gaza. Thank you very much for those updates. Well, as you heard there, the victims of those Israeli bombardments are becoming younger and younger. The mourning of children has become a recurring feature in Gaza as the Israelis continue with their brutal offensive.
They weren't fighting or shooting rockets at anyone. They were just playing on the rooftop of their home. But that didn't stop the Israelis from killing them. Jihad, Wissam, and Fulla are the latest victims of the brutal Israeli offensive against the Gaza Strip.
I was sitting on my roof, and the next thing I see a rocket hitting my neighbor's home where the children were playing.
Hundreds of Palestinians attended the funeral procession of these children in Gaza City, defying warnings of Israeli airstrikes. But this is only one example of Tel Aviv's war on Gaza's youth. Another 3 children were also killed in 2 separate airstrikes. This comes only one day after an Israeli rocket killed 4 Palestinian children while they were playing football on Gaza's coast. More than 40 children have been killed since occupation forces launched Operation Protective Edge. All the while, leaders in Tel Aviv continue their massacres in the name of self-defense.
Earlier, a Hamas official has denied reports of a ceasefire, rejecting Israeli claims that they had agreed to halt fire by early Friday. Hamas spokesman in Gaza, Sami Abu Zuri, told AFP that the news of a ceasefire agreement was incorrect. He added, however, that efforts are still ongoing to reach a truce, but as of yet, no progress has been made. The denial came after an Israeli official claimed to have reached a ceasefire deal with Hamas, due to kick off on Friday. Well, a UN-requested truce between the Israelis and Palestinian resistance factions came to an end earlier on Thursday. The truce, which began at 10 a.m. local time and ended at 3 p.m., brought temporary reprieve from 9 days of intense Israeli shelling on Gaza, in which at least 230 Palestinians were killed. No aid entered the Gaza Strip during the pause in fighting, but it gave thousands of displaced Palestinians who have fled their homes the chance to return, albeit briefly.
After days of empty streets and closed shops, Gaza City sprang back to life on Thursday after a fragile UN-negotiated humanitarian truce between Palestinian factions and the Israeli entity called for a stop to cross-border fire. The 5-hour truce began at 10 a.m. local time and ended at 3 p.m. The people of Gaza City immediately took advantage of the truce, taking to the streets in their cars and forcing police to try to negotiate the traffic jams that suddenly formed. Gazans who were relieved with the temporary ceasefire had hoped that the truce were longer.
It's not enough. People need to go out and get supplies and to get their belongings. It should have been from 7 a.m. until dusk.
We've been stuck in our houses during this war because of the violence. It's like living under curfew.
And outside banks in the city, the image was similar. Crowds of hundreds of people massed on ATMs, eager to withdraw money to buy supplies before the 5-hour truce comes to an end.
I've been borrowing money from people to get by, and now I'm going to be able to pay them back. The truce is a chance for people to get out of their homes and get money and supplies.
For 10 days we have been imprisoned in our homes because of the offensive. There are a lot of people going to the banks and there isn't enough money. Employees did not get their salaries, so people are under pressure. And we hope the coming days will be better and this crisis will be over for good.
Now with the short truce over, Palestinians living in Gaza are bracing themselves for more Israeli shelling within the next few hours, as the death toll from 5 days of Zionist attacks climbs to over 230.
A Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 with over 280 passengers on board has crashed in eastern Ukraine. Both Kiev and the opposition denied involvement in the incident, but the plane was reportedly shot down by a surface-to-air missile, prompting an international outcry which could add a new dimension to the conflict in Ukraine.
Lightning doesn't strike twice, well, at least for Malaysian Airlines, which lost an aircraft earlier this year. Now a Malaysian passenger jet with 295 people on board has been shot down in eastern Ukraine near the Russian border, in a region where Ukrainian government forces are battling pro-Russian separatists. Malaysian Airlines has confirmed that it has lost contact with the plane when it was flying over Ukrainian soil. Moscow, for its part, said that the plane had not entered its airspace. According to the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Ukraine, the airplane en route from Amsterdam to the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur was targeted by the Russian-made air defense missile system called Buk. Russia's RIA Novosti, however, cited its source, who said that Kiev had already reported deploying Buk in the Donetsk region. However, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko claimed that eastern rebels hit the plane with a surface-to-air missile at an altitude of 10,000 meters.
I want to pay your attention to the fact that we call it neither accident nor catastrophe. It's a terrorist attack.
Separatists, for their part, have accused Ukrainian government forces of shooting down the plane, stating that its self-defense forces simply don't have such military equipment. The incident caused uproar within the international community, including the UN and US.
We've seen the reports that a Malaysian Airlines passenger plane has crashed near the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. We have no further information at the moment. This is a tragic development, and our thoughts are with the passengers, the crew, and their families.
Obviously, the world is watching reports of a downed passenger jet near the Russia-Ukraine border. And it looks like it may be a terrible tragedy. Right now, we're working to determine whether there were American citizens on board. That is our first priority, and I've directed my national security team to stay in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why. And as a country, our thoughts and prayers are with all the families of the passengers, wherever they call home.
The U.S. State Department, meanwhile, announced it was closely monitoring events on the ground.
All of you have seen, and many of you have asked me about what we know about the reports of the Malaysian plane crash. We have seen the same reports you have. At this point, we do not have any confirmed information about casualties, the cause, or additional details. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those on board, their families and loved ones. We're closely monitoring the situation. The Secretary is, of course, aware of these reports, and we're seeking additional information. Our embassy in Kyiv is also in close contact with the Ukrainian authorities on this incident, but at this point, those are all the details that we have.
The truth is, we're not only back, we're back.
But with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden already warning of dire consequences for the rebels in eastern Ukraine, it appears that Washington and its partners in Kiev have found a new pressure point to demand more concessions from the separatists and their friends in the Kremlin.
Same time next week?
Same time next week.
Well, in the strongest accusation yet of Moscow's involvement in the Ukraine crisis, Kiev is claiming that a Russian jet shot down a Ukrainian Su-25 attack plane. Fresh allegations come as troops loyal to Kiev continue with their so-called anti-terrorist operations in the east of the country.
In Kiev's latest bid to substantiate Moscow's direct support for separatists in the country's east, Ukraine is accusing Russia of shooting down a warplane over its own territory. The Ukrainian army claimed that a Russian jet shot down a Ukrainian Su-25 attack plane by an air-to-air missile, but the pilot safely ejected.
A military jet of the armed forces of the Russian Federation delivered a missile strike at a Ukrainian armed forces Su-25 plane performing a task on Ukrainian territory. Our plane was shot down. The pilot ejected and was evacuated to a safe place by units of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The Russian Ministry of Defense, for its part, called Kiev's accusations absurd. This is the third reported incident this week in which a Ukrainian plane was allegedly hit by a missile. These Ukrainian jets are only part of the war machine running Kiev's so-called anti-terrorist operations against a civilian population. Luckily for this 7-year-old boy, Ukrainian airstrikes which hit residential buildings in the Donetsk Republic did not manage to claim his life. As rescue workers were cleaning up the aftermath of the attack, they managed to hear muddled cries of Bogdan, who miraculously avoided being crushed by tons of debris. Unfortunately, other victims of the airstrike in the town of Snezno weren't so lucky. The attack left at least 11 people killed and 8 others wounded. However, the Ukrainian military has reportedly retreated west from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions after fighting with eastern separatists. After withdrawing from their former stronghold of Slavyansk last week, rebels have repositioned their forces in the provincial capital of Donetsk, but it seems it won't be too long before Ukrainian forces come back and leave behind another trail of blood and destruction.
Moscow-based journalist Elena Malinovskaya joins us now via Skype to discuss that ongoing crisis in eastern Ukraine. Elena, is there a link between Kiev's accusation that Moscow shot down a Ukrainian fighter jet and the downing of this Malaysian passenger plane?
Well, I personally would not go into drawing these parallels so far, but according to Russian aviation sources, the aircraft was flying at the altitude of more than 10,000 meters and was supposed to enter the Russian airspace at some point. But that is when the Malaysian Airlines lost contact with the plane. So it happened before it crossed the border, so the plane didn't establish any contact with the Russian air traffic controllers. And the plane disappeared from the radar screens about 10 minutes before it was supposed to enter. Well, there are speculations that might seem crazy at the point, but still that the President Putin's plane might have been the target of the Ukrainian missile. It was reportedly flying at the same altitude and at the same time there, and these are reports from the Russian agency. Someone from the Russian aviation said that the airfloat plane was flying at the same time, also on this altitude. But technically, the responsibility for the plane crash rests fully with the Ukrainian side and Ukrainian traffic controllers, because the Ukrainian city of Dnepropetrovsk and the traffic controllers there should have been monitoring the plane at the time, and until it crossed the border near the town of Tomak, which did not happen.
Well, reports suggest that a Buk missile was used to shoot down this aircraft. So do rebels in eastern Ukraine have such weapons in their possession?
Well, that is a very good question indeed, since the Ukrainian authorities deployed this missile system before the crash. Basically, prior to the Malaysian plane crash, the planes that traveled at height of 10 or more kilometers are only vulnerable to this type of missile, which are the S-300 and the Buk missile systems. And the self-defense forces in Ukraine, they simply don't have such sophisticated weapons.
Well, the U.S. Vice President already said that there would be hell to pay if the rebels were behind this attack. How worried should the people in eastern Ukraine be about such statements?
There certainly should be an investigation into this terrible tragedy before we could expect any reaction on these words of the U.S. Vice President. But in response to this, I might also mention that I was just this evening, I was interviewing the Donetsk People's Republic Prime Minister Alexander Borodai, and he said that there was no doubt that this that this plane was downed by the Ukrainian missile. He said that they were appalled by the actions of the Ukrainian forces, and it is rather obvious because it was down at a higher altitude. And again, as far as I know, the aircraft of this particular type, they do not fly lower, so it is very tricky to actually to monitor and to down this flight. And yeah, downing this plane might be only matter of something that could happen from the Ukrainian side.
Well, if there are American citizens on board that flight and Washington accuses Ukraine's rebels of being behind the attack, will Moscow be accused of aiding terrorism?
Well, this is a very brave allegation, but again, there should be a thorough investigation into the terrible tragedy. And we can hear all sorts of claims at this point, but we should just wait and see what are the consequences and what are the reports from the site, from the place.
All right, Moscow-based journalist Elena Malinovskaya, thank you very much for weighing in on that. Following fresh sanctions imposed by the EU and US on Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that Washington's new biting sanctions against his country will backfire against US national interests.
Targeting some of Russia's largest companies and individuals in the finance, military, and energy sectors, the European Union, along with the United States, have escalated sanctions against the Russian Federation over its alleged backing of pro-Moscow rebels in Ukraine's restive east. The American package of sanctions packed the most punch and drew an angry threat of serious retaliation from Russia, further stressing already strained ties between Washington and Moscow. In the latest statement issued by its foreign ministry, Russia condemned what it described as U.S. blackmail. The furious statement read, "We do not intend to tolerate blackmail and reserve the right to take retaliatory measures. This is a primitive attempt to take revenge for the fact that events in Ukraine are developing differently from Washington's scenario." Moscow also stressed that the measures against its energy firms would not be effective, adding that Washington's strategy will lead to its bitter disappointment. For his part, Russian President Vladimir Putin commented on Washington's latest move during a visit to Brazil, warning that U.S. sanctions will take relations with Russia to a dead end and damage U.S. business interests in his country.
Sanctions have a boomerang effect, and without any doubt they will push U.S.-Russian relations into a dead end and cause very serious damage. And I am sure that this also damages national long-term strategic interests of the U.S. government and the U.S. people.
The package of sanctions imposed by the U.S. targeted Gazprom Bank, Russia's third largest bank, Novatek, its largest natural gas supplier, and oil giant, Rosneft. Also listed are 5 Russian nationals and 11 Russian and Ukrainian entities, whose assets will be frozen. The U.S. list of sanctions included measures against the self-proclaimed breakaway Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine. The EU also agreed to target Russian firms allegedly linked to actions undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. Kiev hailed the latest punitive measures against Russia, which it believes would force the Kremlin into pressuring pro-Russia rebels to withdraw from Ukraine's eastern regions, as tensions continue to rise along the fragile border between the two ex-Soviet states.
You're tuned in to Alatija World News. Still ahead in tonight's bulletin. Not equal in the eyes of the law, Saudi diplomats escape prosecution in the UK. Welcome back. Here's another look at the top stories we're following this hour. Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu orders occupation forces to launch a ground offensive against the Gaza Strip. Renewed Israeli strikes on Gaza kill another 6 Palestinian children, raising the death toll to 237. Warring sides in Ukraine trade blame after a Malaysian Airlines plane is shot down in the east of the country, killing 295 people. And Russia warns fresh U.S. sanctions against Moscow will backfire, describing the move as blackmail. Suicide attacks and bombings have resulted in the death of at least 11 people in Iraq. In the first attack, a bomb detonated in the busy Sharjah market in the capital Baghdad, leaving 4 killed and 12 others wounded. That was followed by a suicide bomber ramming his explosive-laden car into a military checkpoint in Taji, north of the capital, killing 4 soldiers, 3 civilians, and wounding dozens of others. This as Iraqi security forces backed by the country's air force have repelled an attack by extremist militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State on a northern Turkmen town of Amirli. The assault by the Al-Qaeda offshoot was designed to be a surprise attack against military positions in the town. However, the Iraqi army responded swiftly and was able to ward off the attack, killing 15 militants in the process. The head of the UN Refugee Agency, meanwhile, said that a political resolution is crucial in order to end the suffering of hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees. Nearly 1 million people have fled their homes in the northern parts of Iraq after IS fighters took control of Mosul and surrounding areas last month.
There is no humanitarian solution for this tragedy. These people can receive tents, can receive food, can receive water, but that's not what they want. What they want is to be able to go back home and to restart their lives. There is no humanitarian solution for this crisis. The solution is political. And my appeal to all Iraqi political leaders is to come together, to overcome differences, to overcome contradictions, and to be able to find a solution that reunites the Iraqi people.
While so-called Islamic State militants have been waging a bloody war against all of Iraq, one of their main targets has been the country's ethnic minority groups. Rihab al-Rikabi now gives us a look into the systematic persecution of the Turkmen and Shabak communities at the hands of the extremist militants.
Since the takeover of Mosul, Islamic State extremist militants are crushing Iraq's ethnic groups, which make up as much as 14% of the country's population. The advance of the terrorist Islamic State in Iraq has left Iraqi Shia Turkmen and Shabak communities facing danger and forced displacement with little government protection, whereas the terrorist militants are enjoying the spoils of war. Iraq's Turkmen minority in the towns of Tushurmato, Tel Afar, Slayman Bek, Al-Bayat and Amirli, and the Shabaks of the Nineveh Plains face a war of ethnic and sectarian-based genocide by the cold-blooded Islamic State militants. Iraqi politicians asserted that the Shia Turkmen and Shabaks in those areas are under constant threat of abduction, beheadings or mass killings by the extremist militants, after the militants have seized control of their property and livestock.
The Turkmen areas of Tel Afar, Taza, Amirli and Al-Bayat and many other areas have become the primary targets for the terrorists. The international human rights organizations and the NGOs should take quick response to end the suffers of the residents in these areas.
The heinous crimes by the Islamic State militants have forced thousands of Turkmen and Shabak families to flee their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring endangered areas, but at least tens of kilometers away from the Islamic State cold-blooded operatives. According to human rights activists and officials, most of Turkmen people could seek out shelter in the Sinjar region of northwest Iraq, near the Syrian border, while others settled at Al-Khazir refugee camp near the border between Nineveh and Erbil provinces, where their families are living in dire circumstances amid the severe shortages of health care, food, clean drinking water and medical supplies.
Around 150,000 Turkmen have forcibly fled their devastated cities towards Sinjar, where they are living in dire conditions.
The sufferance of Iraqi Turkmen and Shabak communities in Islamic State-occupied areas and the genocide the extremist militants are carrying out against them have been emboldened by the international community's silence and inaction. However, Turkmen and Shabak people are still calling for support from international human rights organizations as their community members are facing a campaign of ethnic cleansing led by the Islamic State militants.
As a Turkmen, I urge the Iraqi Human Rights Ministry, the international human rights organizations and the UN to save the Turkmen community from the ongoing massacre in Tel Afar, Tushurmato, Taza, Dakuk and Al-Bayat other towns.
According to UN Refugee Agency, more than 1.2 million Iraqis have been internally displaced by conflict this year, including more than 300,000 Turkmen Shiite and Shabak people who had to flee the violence to northern, central or southern Iraqi provinces. while many others from Turkmen community refused to leave their homes, as they said, leaving their hometowns to the terrorist militants would deprive the Turkmen majority territories from their actual designation. Rihab Rikabi, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
One of the methods the notorious Islamic State militants have used to capture swaths of Iraqi territory involves the use of social media. Mustafa Al-Kattan now looks at the propaganda side of the conflict.
Besides the brutal and ruthless characteristic and the continuous indiscriminate attacks they launch against Iraqi people, the notorious ISIS terrorist group described as the frontrunner in using social media and other outlets in a slickly way. The currently known as Islamic State terrorist group, an Al-Qaeda offshoot, releases various length videos on YouTube showing different attacks that targeting Iraqi security forces and civilians. So far, their propaganda was successful in coercing some communities in Iraq to give them support and shelter, which can be one of the factors that contributed to the seizure of Mosul and other areas. Observer said, while modern armies smoothed their path with missiles and airstrikes, ISIS did it with tweets and movies.
The countries which support ISIS have long experience in the media. They know how to make it as a decisive factor in any war.
The group is more sophisticated than other groups in using internet outlets, and they also dedicate some of their electronic efforts to entice foreign fighters by establishing Al Hayat Media Center, which targets Western audience and produce material in English and other languages.
The internet and social networks are now considered one of the best ways to publish an ideology to the globe. It could be used to attract and recruit people from different parts of the world.
Recently, the group released high-quality, one-hour length movie titled as The Clanging of the Swords 4, which shows different atrocious images of cold-blooded killing of Iraqi security forces personnel and civilians.
ISIS has realized that media is a very effective tool in intimidating people. However, media and security experts believe that they're reliant on the internet and social media can indicate their inability to get something palpable on the ground. Mustafa Al-Kattan, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
Well, as talks continue in Vienna between Iran and the six world powers, reports have emerged that the current round of negotiations over Iran's nuclear program could end before a July 20th deadline. The Geneva interim nuclear deal and the deadline for striking a comprehensive agreement could be extended for several months.
Iran and the P5+1 are still in Vienna, racing to reach a deal over the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. But it seems negotiations between Tehran and the six world powers will end before the scheduled deadline of July 20th. Officials say the talks will end on Friday, although the Geneva interim nuclear deal and the deadline for striking a final agreement could be extended for several months. That option, however, is still being debated. During a statement in the White House briefing room, U.S. President Barack Obama said he will consult with Congress as it decides whether additional time past the July 20 deadline is needed to complete nuclear talks.
Based on consultations with Secretary Kerry and my national security team, it's clear to me that we've made real progress in several areas and that we have a credible way forward. But as we approach a deadline of July 20th under the interim deal, there are still some significant gaps between the international community and Iran, and we have more work to do. So over the next few days, we'll continue consulting with Congress, and our team will continue discussions with Iran and our partners as we determine whether additional time is necessary to extend our negotiations.
The sixth round of talks between Tehran and the P5+1, headed by Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton, officially started in Vienna on July 3rd, with both sides describing the negotiations as hard but constructive and positive. A comprehensive agreement would limit the scope of Iran's enrichment program in exchange for an easing of sanctions. Iran and the six world powers agreed in their Geneva deal that the July 20th deadline could be extended for another 6 months if all the 7 nations agree.
We are hoping still to work as close to the July 20th as possible, but that doesn't mean that if we see feasibility of extension as well as a useful purpose for extension, that we won't be able to exercise that option. But that is something that we still need to discuss. I'm not willing to discuss it until the evening of July 20th. But a lot can be done in the next 5 days because we have, in the last few days, done a lot. While the differences remain, I don't want to mislead you, serious differences remain, and those serious differences need to be overcome.
For the time being at least, much of these same obstacles to reaching an agreement remain. While the Islamic Republic kept its end of the bargain, reducing uranium enrichment, Iranian officials have accused the US and the Zionist regime of working to derail the talks.
A guerrilla-style assault has killed at least 14 Tunisian soldiers and wounded more than 20 others stationed at 2 military posts near the border with Algeria. The army had been conducting an operation to flush out al-Qaeda-linked militants in the area.
At least 14 Tunisian soldiers were killed and 20 others wounded after gunmen attacked military checkpoints near the Algerian border in the Mount Chambi area. The death toll, according to Tunisian officials, is expected to rise and is reportedly the highest death toll registered by the army since independence in 1965. The gunmen, armed with rocket-propelled grenades and rifles, staged 2 simultaneous attacks on army checkpoints in the Mount Shamabi area. One of the gunmen was reportedly killed in the attack.
2 armed terrorist groups infiltrated into the area of Mount Chambi at 7 p.m. yesterday and simultaneously attacked 2 border posts using machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades.
Thousands of Tunisian troops have been deployed to the area since April, where a small group of militants have been holed up, some since al-Qaeda-affiliated militants were driven out of Mali last year. The attacks came almost a year to the day since Tunisian soldiers were ambushed in the same region of Mount Chambi. 8 soldiers were killed in the attack on July 29 last year, which happened just days after the assassination of opposition politician Mohamed Brahmi in the capital, Tunis, sparking a major political crisis in the North African country. Last month, al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, or Aqim, for the first time claimed responsibility for recent attacks in Tunisia, including an assault in May on the home of the Interior Minister that left 4 security guards dead. Since late 2012, Tunisia's security forces have been battling militants hiding out in the Mount Chambi and Kef regions and thought to be linked to Aqim. Tunisia has been rocked by Islamist violence since the 2011 revolution that toppled the decades-old dictatorship and triggered the so-called Arab Spring. Authorities say they have gained the upper hand in the fight against militants active along the Algerian border, while acknowledging the campaign to root them all out will take time.
A new report published by Scotland Yard suggested that Saudi diplomats have repeatedly evaded criminal charges in the UK on the grounds of diplomatic immunity. And even though the latest report focuses specifically on driving under the influence of alcohol, Saudi nationals have escaped harsh punishment in the past for much more serious offenses.
In Saudi Arabia, the harshest form of Sharia law is strictly enforced and alcohol is illegal. The punishment just for being caught drinking can be a prison sentence, a hefty fine, or public floggings. But for diplomatically immune Saudi nationals, breaking such laws in the UK seems to come naturally and with little in the way of consequences.
Well, the Conservative Party is the only party.
According to the statement by Mark Simmons, an official with the British Foreign Office, Scotland Yard's Diplomatic Protection Group had flagged 14 serious offences last year by people with diplomatic immunity. A significant number of those were Saudi nationals. Simmons noted that the Foreign Office seeks to have diplomatic immunity waived in such serious offences, those which would receive a prison sentence of longer than 12 months. The Saudi diplomats who avoided the charges were not named. However, no entity can confirm that they will receive punishments at home from the Saudi royal family's enforcers. Perhaps even more shocking is the case of the homosexual Saudi prince, Saud bin Abdulaziz bin Nasser Al Saud, who was freed after 3 years following his conviction at London's Old Bailey court for beating and strangling his manservant to death. Saud Al Saud was carrying on a homosexual relationship with his servant, and the murder was the final act in a deeply abusive master-servant relationship in which the prince carried out frequent attacks on his aide for his own personal gratification. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations stipulates that those benefiting from immunity are expected to obey the law, but for Saudi officials, the rule doesn't seem to apply.
You've been watching Al World News with me, Mariam Khaddad. Let's recap our headlines. Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu orders occupation forces to launch a ground offensive against the Gaza Strip. Renewed Israeli strikes on Gaza kill another 6 Palestinian children, raising the death toll to 237. Warring sides in Ukraine trade blame after a Malaysian Airlines plane is shot down in the east of the country, killing 295 people. And Russia warns fresh U.S. sanctions against Moscow will backfire, describing the move as blackmail. Well, there you have it. Thanks for watching and have a good night.